Hey there, class! My name is Lodden Harp, and today we are going to be talking about the individual values, perceptions, and reactions of individuals in the workplace, and how to best understand and deal with these personal aspects. As we move to our first slide, we're going to begin with discussing attitudes. Typically, you may hear, you've got a bad attitude, or you have a good attitude. But what does that really mean, and how can you help what type of attitude you have? Attitudes are complexes of beliefs and feelings that people have about specific ideas, situations, or other people. They are formed through a combination of our personal values, our experiences, and our personalities. So, in the workplace, how do you feel about your job, the people around you, and the situations occurring in combination with your own values, experience, and personality will dictate what type of attitude and ultimate satisfaction you have in the workplace. As you can see, it's not simply you have a bad attitude or a good attitude, but there are many variables that contribute to the attitude you may have toward your boss, your work, colleagues, and so on. The attitude you have toward the various aspects of your work will dictate your organizational commitment. You will either have effective commitment, which is positive emotional attachment and strong identification with its values and goals, normative commitment, which is feeling obliged to stay, or continuous commitment, which means you're staying because you need the paycheck or don't want to mar relationships you made at work. The reason you're staying at your job says a lot about the attitude you have toward it. A good way for a superior to foster positive attitudes in the workplace is increasing employee engagement. Engaged employees give their full effort of their jobs. Disengaged workers do not perform close to their potential capability. Engagement is enhanced in the workplace when employees have clear goals, have the resources needed to do a good job, get meaningful feedback on their performance, and are able to use their talents, are recognized for doing a good job, have positive relationships with coworkers, have opportunities to learn and grow, and have supportive leadership. So, now take a second and analyze the position you're in. Are you a superior or subordinate? If you're in charge of employees, look at one or two areas you can increase employee engagement. Maybe that means recognizing a job well done or providing outlets for employees to use their talents. As a subordinate employee, meaning you have a boss, try asking your boss for clear goals and roles in your position or for extra resources you need to do your job well. Whether you're an employee or employer, you can exercise the practice of building positive attitudes in the workplace through employee engagement. Let's move on to the next slide as we discuss more intrinsic aspects of individuals. Values and emotions are very important in the workplace. Personal and work values influence important individual and organizational outcomes, including performance and retention, and are often considered to be important work outcomes in themselves. In a previous job I had, my boss bullied me and bullied others. I had to watch as he verbally berated a man I worked with. The man had severe PTSD and was the kindest to everyone in the office. My boss verbally berated other individuals in the workplace, and this was against my personal and work values. There are several different types of values to consider under the umbrella of value. They range from terminal values, which are long-term life goals, to instrumental values, which are the preferred means of achieving those life goals. Within the workplace, there are intrinsic work values relating to work itself and extrinsic work values, which are the outcomes of doing work. Of course, there's going to be conflict between values, whether that's interpersonal value conflict, which is a conflict between happiness and the long-term value of your career. There are times you have to ask yourself, do I want to spend more time with my family or longer hours at the office for that promotion? There's also interpersonal value conflict, which is clashing values between two people holding conflicting values. That was a conflict between me and my boss. Not only was there a personality clash, but the value and respect I placed on others was much higher than my boss's, which led to further conflicts. The last value conflict is when an employee's value conflict with the values of the organization. Can you imagine being pro-life and working for Planned Parenthood? There would be a daily check in your spirit, and it would make it almost impossible to do your job well. Let's move on to the next slide, class, as we discuss the role of emotions, affect, and mood in behavior. As a female, I can attest to how minor changes in mood or emotions can greatly affect my overall behavior. Learning the role of emotions, affect, and mood in correspondence with behavior will allow you as a subordinate or superior to take a step back when an employee acts out of character to look for the underlying issue. The surface will normally depict an underlying issue. Emotions are intense, Short-term reactions directed at something or someone and create a state of physical readiness. The quality of subordinates' emotional exchanges with their leader influences the effective tone in the work group. Effective leaders use emotion to generate positive follow behaviors. Unlike emotions, moods are short-term emotional states not directed at anyone. Ever hear, "You're in a good mood," or "Ooh, you're in a bad mood"? You could be exhibiting an emotion not directed at anyone or anything. Unlike a mood that only affects oneself, affect is the tendency to experience a particular mood. Whether it's positive affect, which is high energy and positivity, or negative affect, which is feelings of being upset, fearful, or distressed, an employee will have particular affects. Moods and emotions can influence our job satisfaction with our jobs and employers. Higher positive affects is related to increased creativity, openness, new information, and efficient decision-making. It's important to recognize the affectivity of others in order to ultimately cultivate positive affect toward and in the workplace. On the next slide we go as we address perception, the set of processes by which an individual becomes aware of and interprets information about the environment. Have you ever heard someone say, "Well, I didn't perceive it that way"? You may hear that at work, at home, anywhere you go. It was perceived differently because the information was interpreted in another fashion. Maybe the individual had a different attitude toward the topic, values conflicted, or a different affect was projected. Perception is key in communicating with employees because in order to get a point across, the under individuals need to perceive the topic the same way the superior does, or issues with miscommunication is sure to follow. The basic perceptual processes are selective perception and stereotyping. With selective perception, one will screen out the information he's uncomfortable with or that contradicts with his beliefs. An example is seeing a hardworking colleague asleep at the desk. One with a positive selective perception may see the employee taking a break, but with a negative selective perception, he sees the employee as just lazy. Another perceptual process is stereotyping. Stereotyping is labeling people based on one attribute. An example is thinking an Asian individual is smart at math simply because he's Asian. Of course, there are errors in perception. These include the halo and contrast effect. In the halo effect, we form a general impression based on one, probably positive, characteristic. An example of this is something that happened to me recently. I just got hired on as the marketing and communications coordinator for a local United Way. I guess with this title, my boss and other coworkers think I'm a whiz at graphic design, external communications, and reading minds. I've had so many requests from my boss for things that are simply out of my skill spectrum. I can't Photoshop you to make you look 10 pounds lighter. I can't assume all the media outlets you want a press release into. My boss, when she hired me, thought I was a master communicator that made no error. So when challenges arise, she simply assumes I can conquer anything. If I make a mistake, she discards it and still thinks I'm a whiz at my job. She's perceiving me with the halo effect as an expert communicator that doesn't make mistakes. When I do make errors, she blames them on some external factor, not me. The contrast effect occurs when we compare ourselves or others against another individual who ranks higher or lower in the same characteristic. I was talking to a friend about her boss recently. Her friend's boss paid her more, was more approachable, and promoted positive employee engagement. After that conversation, I became more unsatisfied than ever with my boss. Not because my boss did anything different, but because I was now comparing her against another individual with higher characteristics. Okay, so let's move on along to the next slide as we discuss perception and attribution. In connection with perception, which involves interpretation of the environment, attribution refers to the way we explain the causes of our own, as well as other people's behavior and achievements, and understand why people do what they do. So, perception is the interpretation of what is happening, and attribution is simply an explanation of why a situation is occurring. They go hand in hand. There are two types of attribution, internal and external. Internal factors are having to do with the individual, like ability or effort, while external factors are having to do with the environment, like lack of resources or other people. When a situation occurs, especially negatively, one will go look for someone or something to blame, external factors. Either he blames himself, internal factors, or something else, external factors. He's wanting to attribute his negative situation to something. Obviously, the same will go with a positive situation. Within an organization, it is important to address fairness as well. Perceptions of fairness affect a wide variety of employee attitudes and behaviors, including satisfaction, commitment, trust, and turnover. Fairness can be viewed for 4 ways: distributive, procedural, interpersonal, or informational. Distributive fairness refers to the perceived outcome of the fairness received. It only pertains to the outcome. Procedural fairness is quite the opposite because it addresses the fairness of the procedures used to generate the outcome. Offering the same job to 2 individuals but altering the application process for one to make it easier for one individual may be breaking procedural fairness for the other, and the other that may feel wronged. The third type of fairness is interpersonal fairness. This fairness refers to how well an individual is treated through the procedural process. It doesn't deal with the process itself, but simply how the individual is treated. The fourth type of fairness is informational fairness. This pertains to the amount of information that was given to the individual during the decision-making process. All in all, the purpose of dissecting these 4 aspects of fairness is to emphasize that trust is an outcome of fairness. An employer may use these 4 aspects of fairness as a guide to standardize the procedures and goals he's presenting to employees. Promoting fairness among employees and potential employees cultivates trust within the organization, leading to a positive company morale. Let's move on to the next slide to address stress. We just started the semester, but you may be feeling it already. Stress is our response to a strong stimulus, such as seeing the assignments due before Sunday at midnight and it's Sunday afternoon. There are 2 types of stress, functional and dysfunctional. Functional stress is manageable and it encourages you to be a better worker, while dysfunctional stress is not manageable. It may be the employer's fault for putting too much work on one person, or you may have procrastinated yourself. It may not be anyone's fault at all. The stress is overloading and not productive. Let's move on to our last informational slide as we discuss the 3 stages of the stress process. We've all felt these 3 stages at some point. You begin with alarm because panic has just set in regarding the amount of assignments due. You move on to resistance, where you resist the effects of the stressor and the effort of doing the task before you. The resistance phase cannot last too long because you will end up exhausted and burn out in the 3rd phase of exhaustion. There are 2 types of stressors that contribute to this, and that is role demands, which is stress from your role at work, and interpersonal demands, meaning stress from your personal life. As an employer, it's important to recognize the phases of stress in employees. To see you've placed an incredible amount of work for one person to do and they are panicked, help them with a game plan. See one employee on the brink of the exhaustion phase, re-energize them to stick in the resistance phase to finish the project. It is important as an employer or employee to recognize the phases of stress not only in others but yourself in order not to fall off the exhaustion phase, and because there are consequences of stress both individually and for the organization, but there are ways to manage it to incorporate a work-life balance. As we conclude the presentation on this next slide, I want to ask you a question that you'll answer in your discussion boards. So why is it important to understand emotions, affect, and mood and apply this knowledge in the context of a workplace? I mean, why should you care? Shouldn't your main priority be to get work done, not to interpret if your employee or employer has a positive or negative affect towards something? I want to know why it's important we learn this and how we can apply it to the workplace. Thank you.
All right, push that record button.